Okay. I had just quoted before, I will go and do the things which the Lord had commanded. And now in 2 Nephi 4, it's a person who has grown and matured right before our eyes. In a fairly short number of pages, we get a very complex character. And here's a man who the Spirit says, slay Laban. And he says, well, I've never killed a man before. It's slay Laban. Okay, slays Laban. And at the time, it was kind of like, well, that was kind of awful, but I'll put on his armor and I'll continue on with my whole thing with the others. And that haunts him the rest of his life.
He mentions it later.
Yeah, I mean, it haunted him. The Lord told him to do it, but his conscience was so strong, it haunts him. In fact, it doesn't just haunt him, it haunts the Book of Mormon.
Okay, welcome back, Brother Stoddard, Brother Mark Stoddard. How are you today?
Great. Brother Mark works great. You know, it's a funny thing, we've gotten into this formalistic tradition of brother and then last name, or sister and last name. And I like the way they did it in the times of Joseph Smith.
How did they do that?
It was Brother Joseph. It was Brother
right.
Brigham. You know, it was very familial, encompassing family.
Yeah, much warmer, right?
Yeah. So I think Brother Troy is great.
Well, then I'll call you Brother Mark.
That's perfect.
Okay, well, Brother Mark lived all over the USA, Germany, and England growing up, as his father was in the Air Force. He graduated from Central High School in London, England. Wow, you lived in London?
We lived in Ivor. From my bedroom window, I could see if the Queen was in station at Windsor Castle with the flag flying.
Wow.
So, yeah.
That's amazing.
It was very nice.
So that was 1966.
It was the height of the 60s. You know, we were in Carnaby Street and Beatles and Rolling Stones and all the rest.
So that was in between I Want to Hold Your Hand and Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, like right
Absolutely.
in the middle.
It was Abbey Road time.
So they didn't have the British invasion haircuts. They were kind of shagging it a little bit more.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
All right. In 1972, he graduated from BYU with a BA in English with minors in political science, history, and humanities. He interrupted his education and served as a missionary for 2 years, 68 to 70 in Australia.
Yes.
After graduation, Mark stayed on at BYU to do master's work in English and theater arts. He wrote a one-act comedy, An English Toffee in American Molars, which was selected for production at the BYU Mormon Festival of Arts. I wasn't sure if I was supposed to laugh. Was that a comedy or a tragedy or?
No, well, it was a one-act play about a missionary who went to England, and as many missionaries do, they get a little too familiar with some of the ladies there and say a little too much. And so the play starts off at the Salt Lake airport as this missionary is panicking with his best friend because he's gotten a letter that a girl that he talked to too much and who assumed they were getting married, and she's arriving to get the marriage, and he's trying to figure out how he keeps this from his girlfriend. And so it's all it's a kind of a British comedy, slamming the doors kind of a thing.
Interesting.
So,
is that available anywhere? Can anyone see that?
Yeah. It's published by I can't remember who publishes it now, but yeah, they can write to me if they want to. It's a one-act play. It's just meant to be fun.
That's cool. He also wrote the musical drama Strangers in Nauvoo. We talked about that on the other program. He left the university to become a general contractor in California with his father and brothers. During this time, he was asked by Michael how do you pronounce that? Gearlikes?
Uh,
Creator of Disney on
Grillicus.
Parade and the Polynesian Cultural.
Yeah, Mike Grillicus.
Okay. To be his stage manager of the 10 stages of the Los Angeles Street Scene Festival. Mark went on to a career in business and marketing. He's written 17 books on starting businesses, marketing, and advertising. You've done it all, brother. One book was translated into Russian, and that's I want to refer other people to that other video. And Mark was invited by the Deputy Minister of Higher Education to come to USSR to teach Soviet government groups the fundamentals of the free market. Okay, brother Mark, before we begin, before you open up and talk about what we're going to talk about, I thoroughly enjoyed the Book of Mormon as brilliant literature. But I want to tell you something. I'm not a scholar, okay? I am not a scholar, but I don't think I think I'm quick enough. I have some college. So I was astounded. You are a brilliant writer, and I'm not trying to build you up. I'm not trying to make your ego blow out of the water here, but it was good stuff. So without further ado, let's talk about this. We're going to talk about the Book of Mormon and it being beautiful literature, right?
Absolutely. It's beautiful and brilliant. Sometimes brilliant is not beautiful. And a lot of times, sometimes beautiful is not brilliant, but the Book of Mormon is certainly both. So
let's begin. Where would you like to begin with this?
Well, I'd like to talk about words a little bit, first of all, because all of us, that's our lifeblood of communication. And when I teach at the universities around the country, I like to do an experiment with them. And if that's okay, I'd like to do that experiment here.
Absolutely.
With words. Now, again, people are nervous about quizzes and getting scored and all that stuff. This isn't a quiz, and this isn't a test whether or not you and the readers have a certain intellect or something. That's all nonsense, because you're not on trial. The words are on trial, and words change and the rest of it. So I'd like to just to have you and the listeners quickly do a little non-threatening word fluency survey. I want to see how many of these words are part of your lexicon, part of the words that you use and know about. So I'm going to give you some words, and we'll maybe just go with 10 words.
Okay.
And I'd like you to think about, when I give the word, is it something that is, you know it well and can define it. You use it all the time. The second is, it sounds familiar and you might be able to define it. And then the last one is, never heard of it, or yeah, maybe it's there or whatever. Again, nobody should feel bad or good about how they do this, because we're not scoring you, we're scoring the words. Okay. So we have choice A, B, or C. Let me give you an example.
All right, here we go.
If I give you the word water, easily used, right?
Right.
Use it all the time. Simple. It's there. It's part of what you do. But if I give you the word mollycoddle.
Mollycoddle.
Mollycoddle, you might guess what it is just because of the weird sounding name, or like the word chagrin. You've heard it. You probably can define it. You're comfortable with it. So that would be like in category B. And then category C is a word like Escherichia coli. Okay. Now it's a very specific part of somebody's lexicon, but most people would listen to that and go, what is that?
Well, I know you're pretty wordy already by reading your article. There were some words I had to look up, like neophyte.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
You're like, hey, that's a common word for me. I don't know about you, but
Yeah. Well, but you see what I'm saying? They're
yeah.
into three different categories. Easy to define, B, not so sure, C, what the heck is that? Okay.
Okay.
So let's go down this list. First one. And oh, by the way, you only get 3 seconds.
Okay. Here we go.
We don't want, this has got to be a reflexive.
So I don't have to give you a perfect definition, just what I think it might be.
And you don't give it to me. You just tell me, is that A, B, or C?
Oh, okay. Okay. All right.
I know it perfectly. B sounds familiar. I might be able to define it. And C, never heard of it. Okay.
Okay.
All right. So I'll do the survey with you starting. First word, privily.
Okay.
What is the answer? A, B, or C for you?
Why there's no choices though.
I know, but just in your mind. Is this a word you might be able to immediately define, or maybe if I think about it.
A being absolutely, B being maybe, C being not so much.
Never. Yeah.
Okay, I get it now. Let's start all over again. I'll edit that part out.
Okay. Let's start with privily.
Okay. A, B, or C. Oh, that would be I would say A.
Okay. All right. Rest. W-R-E-S-T. Rest.
C.
Okay. Interposition.
B.
Okay. Circumspectly.
I used to know this word. I'm going to say B now.
Sounds like a B, yeah.
I don't use that word a lot.
Lamentation.
A.
Okay. Ignominiously.
A. I know that from the Book of Mormon.
Peradventure. Peradventure.
Oh, B.
Okay. Humber.
C. Did you say Humber with an H?
Cumber. C-U-M-B-E.
Oh, Cumber. Oh, okay, B. Just put B.
Okay, B. Intercession.
A.
Consignation.
A.
Okay.
No, B. Change that to B.
B. And I'll give one last one. Exult. E-X-U-L-T. Exult.
B.
Yeah. Okay.
Now, can I ask you something? Do I get to? Are we going to go through these and I get to
yes.
explain?
No. Well,
okay.
I'm not going to define them because I'll give you another thing to do to look at it. Keep in mind, when I give this survey to college students around the United States, they come up about or shorter than you do as far as those in the well-known category. Most of them are in the B category, well, maybe, and a great many of them in C. So the reason I tell you that is every one of these words are taken from the Book of Mormon.
Really?
Every one of these words are taken from the Book of Mormon.
That's a big surprise. I wouldn't have thought. Half of those words I don't remember seeing in the Book of Mormon.
And what's really interesting is when you go through, and people can go back and do this themselves, is a lot of these words are not found in the Bible. In fact, a number of these words are scattered throughout the Book of Mormon, and you'll get a certain number of them are only found in First and Second Nephi. A number of them are found only in Alma, and some of them are scattered around. And again, they're not found in the Bible. What's the significance of that? Well, you are a bright person, and our listeners are bright people. They're well read. They're educated in college, educated in life. Joseph Smith had a fourth grade at best education. The only book he really had available to him, much at all, if any, was the Bible. So if the words aren't in the Bible, where did he get them from? And overall, how did he come up with these words? And when you look at the history of these words, and you can go into various dictionaries, show you when the preponderance of use of these words took place. Most of these words took place in the 1600s. Okay, they're not used much today. Most of them are not used much today. So the point is the person who supposedly wrote this book would not have known these words. I suspect that as he was dictating the Book of Mormon, he could turn to Oliver Cowdery, who was a school teacher, who would have learned a number of these words, and he would have said, interposition, what does that mean? Can you imagine Oliver Cowdery getting dictation from an uneducated guy with these profound concepts and having to explain to him the words that he's using? That doesn't make sense.
Yeah, no, it doesn't. Doesn't Joel Skousen talk about this too?
Well, I don't know about Joel, but definitely.
Or am I thinking of one of the Skousens?
Yeah.
I don't think it's Joel either.
Yeah, I know him quite well, and suddenly I won't think of his name.
Yeah, I can't.
Royal
Skousen. That's right. Yeah. Okay.
Royal Skousen. So we were in the same stake high council together.
So, oh really?
Yeah.
Oh my goodness, that's incredible. Now,
and Dan Peterson was in our ward, so to give you
well, you got connections, buddy. You better cough them up. No, you got to do some talking for me. Hey, so what do they call that? Pseudo-biblical language?
Well,
and it's interesting. Let me just say this. It's interesting. It's almost as though the Lord knew what time frame to word things, and so that people could understand, and at the same time keep a kind of a proper biblical to coincide with our King James Bible.
Yeah.
So it didn't sound completely different, right?
Right. Well, that could be so. Again, lamentation, you know it because there's the Book of Lamentations and other things biblical. But keep in mind, most of these words are not found in the Bible, but they're what they call Jacobean English. That's the King James version is written in Jacobean English, which is also the Shakespearean English, very much in that same mode.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, it's quite interesting that it would be that way. But my point in this is the Book of Mormon is brilliant literature for many reasons, and one of them begins the fact is the use of words is quite profound throughout and impossible for somebody of Joseph Smith's abilities to have written. Could not have happened. the gymnastics, the mental gymnastics that detractors to the Book of Mormon go through in order to try to, pin Joseph Smith and try to talk about it are just ridiculous.
Well,
Joseph
and also,
could not have written this.
right. And there was no, there basically was no creative process.
Oh, no.
There's no evidence of him. I looked up last night when I was reading your article, and that's an awesome article. By the way, brothers and sisters, I'm going to leave the link to the Book of Mormon as Brilliant Literature, and you can find that in Meridian Magazine. How long C.S. Lewis took to write Narnia was like, just the creative process alone was 10 years.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I guess he was good friends with J.R. Tolkien.
Yeah.
Which also probably took, I don't know how many years he took to write the trilogy of the Lord of the Rings. But am I right about that? There has to be a creative process to come up with the Book of Mormon if it was not a historical document, or historical writings.
Nobody, pretty much nobody, or maybe occasionally, writes without rewriting. Some notable authors have said, I hate writing. No, I love writing, but I hate rewriting because it is laborious and you have to go through and figure it out. It's difficult. And to be able to plot and develop the characters and to be able to turn it into some profound language is just puts it into the category of brilliant language, of brilliant literature, excuse me.
Well, one thing you mentioned in your article, you say that, where is it? Right here. You talk about Occam's razor. Occam, sorry. You spell it O-C-K-H-A-M. I saw it O-C-C. Can you spell it both ways?
It's spelled in different ways. That's part of the fluidity of particularly Middle and Jacobean English.
Okay.
The words get, Will Rogers said it's a shame when a man can't learn to spell a word more than one way.
Right. Well, and we were just talking about our kids. We do early morning seminary now, and somebody asked, how do you spell baptized? And in the United States, it's spelled with a Z. In England, it's spelled with an S.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So you mentioned, how do you pronounce that? Occam's? Occam's. I'm sorry. Occam's razor.
Now, I got to correct myself.
Sure.
That's how I say it, and that's how I've heard other people say it. But we weren't around when Occam or Occam or whatever he was, so who knows how it's really should be.
Right. Kind of like saying laboratory or laboratory.
Yes.
Okay. So, what exactly is Occam's razor?
Well,
and keep this in mind. So here's my next question: what is Occam's razor, and do you feel it works for or against the Book of Mormon?
Occam was a priest and other kinds of stuff, but he's a philosopher. Let me just read what it says. Ptolemy actually developed this idea, and Occam put it in simple form. We consider it a good principle to explain the phenomenon by the simplest hypothesis possible. Okay? When given a choice of possible reasons, choose the simplest one. Okay? So you go down the list after we go through this whole discussion of the brilliance of the writing, the brilliance of the plotting and characters of the Book of Mormon, and you say, how did this come to be? And you could say, well, obviously the writer went to Oxford and studied at Cambridge and taught and developed all these things, and had a team of archaeological experts and a team with all kinds of backgrounds in order to develop what they've done. And by the time you twist and wind and weave and try to come up with the explanation of how the Book of Mormon came to be, because remember, this isn't like the first vision where Joseph Smith was the only one there, and so you can pick at his words.
Right.
The book is here. It's tangible. How did it come into being? And when you twist and weave through all kinds of explanations, the simplest explanation is exactly what happened. What Joseph Smith said, he received it from the Lord. He dictated it to Oliver and the other scribes and went back. They did a few minor corrections here and there, and that's it in less than 3 months. It's Occam's razor would say, given all the explanations for how the Book of Mormon supposedly came about, the simplest is an angel or a divine interference is the reason. So that's the idea of Occam's razor.
Yeah. So basically, the evidence points more, or the simplest answer. The simplest answer.
Yeah.
Would be there is no evidence, like we said, of creative process. It was written in 2 months. No one ever came up and said that was my grandfather's manuscript.
Well, yeah, and let's take that.
There's never been any evidence of a sure.
Yeah, I mean, just take what you just said. I'm a businessman. I've been through money and all the kinds of crazy stuff with that. Money is a huge driver in the world and always has been and always will be. And you say, if Oliver Cowdery had written the book, or Solomon Spaulding, nonsense, or Sidney Rigdon, bright guy, had written the book, his ancestors would have gone after the royalties in a huge way. Even today, they would go back and find it and be able to tie it together, because the royalties for this book would be enormous. You could prove that, but they can't.
No,
because what didn't happen.
And for many years, that was the theory. That was the only theory they had till like the 1880s, and then they finally got a copy of Solomon Spaulding's manuscript found.
Yeah,
and it was nothing like
it's
the Book
nothing.
of Mormon.
No,
But that was something that the anti-Mormons and the critics were holding on to for decades. And then you've got the late war. You've got what's the other one? There's just so many theories that have been debunked. But you're right. Plus all of the like I said, I told you the other day, I got through reading that where is it at? I always forget the name. I always want to say it's Investigating the Book of Mormon Witnesses. That's a really good book.
yes.
So it talks about plus the 3 witnesses. It comes down to them too, and the 8 witnesses.
Well, and there's another witness. Well, there's several other witnesses, but one of them is the prophetic statement that millions shall know brother Joseph again. Praise to the man, right?
Right.
Which, part of the last dispensation was in there too. But a prophetic utterance is millions of people have read this book, millions and millions, and it has changed lives. It has altered hearts. It has completely changed the way people think. It's right there. And it's never boring, but I'm going to say almost boring to hear the many testimonies that are given and how similar they are. I've got to tell you one example. I was in Australia as a missionary, and we had our standard door approach. And for some reason, a lady was out gardening in her garden, and she said hello to us. And we said, we explained who we were. And she kind of looked like, oh, what are these guys up to? And I said, we have a book that you might be interested in. It tells of people who left Jerusalem and came to the Americas, and about their family history and religious history. And would you be interested in reading it? And she stopped and kind of put down her trowel and stood up, and she says, "Did you know I'm Jewish?" What? No. Says, "Tell me more about these people who left Jerusalem," because this was in Australia. She had left Israel as well.
Mm-hmm.
She was there in Australia. And we told her about it. And she says, "Yes, I'd like to read that." So I gave her the book, and I thumbed through, and I gave her about 10 or 15 places to read. I don't remember what they were. If I did it again, it would have been totally different, because it wasn't me directing that. And I gave her the book to read, and most of them were in Alma and Nephi and King Mosiah and Benjamin and all these kinds of verses. And she said, "Well, come back in a week or so." So I think it was a week or 10 days. We came back, and she was sitting on the porch kind of doing this. And I went, "Uh-oh, we're in trouble." She goes, "You tricked me." I went, "Not on purpose." I'm not sure why. It says, "You weren't straight with me." I said, "Okay." It says, "I am Jewish by birth and by religion." Oh, okay. It says, "And I'm reading in this book, and it is fascinating." And I read all the way through everything you said, and I went back and reread it all the way through. I was up late nights reading it, and I knew it was the Word of God.
Oh
And
my
then you
Lord.
had me read 3 Nephi 11. And then it was Jesus that is the Messiah. And I had no choice at that point to realize that Jesus is the Christ and Jesus is the Messiah.
Isn't that beautiful?
You tricked me. And I kind of took a sigh of relief that was a good trick. So, yeah, but that's the reaction of millions have had of the Book of Mormon as a great witness of what it is. So,
Right. You can't help but read it. I mean, we grew up in the church, so we're used to the Book of Mormon. You know, you're not a convert. Well, we
no,
were converts at 8 years old. Well, and then we're converted by the Holy Ghost when we gain
yeah,
our testimony. However,
yeah,
we know the
whenever that
gospel is
was.
true. Right. And for some it's an instant thing like Alma the Younger, and for others it takes years, but it's still conversion, right?
Yeah,
Uh,
absolutely.
I love that story of, and I felt the spirit when you were talking about it, uh, because it is I try to imagine what does the world think when it reads those who do take the challenge to read the Book of Mormon, and not even call it a challenge. Some people enjoy reading, like my wife. Uh, she was an atheist before she joined the church, but she gained a testimony by reading the Book of Mormon, and thank goodness that she was an avid reader, because she picked it up and couldn't put it down. But yeah, you can't, because you even talk about it being, and you mentioned earlier that regardless of how it was created, it's here,
It is.
and it's and we're and there's stories in it, and there's allegories, there's
Yeah,
characters, and it would be, I think it would be really difficult for Joseph Smith to, because you have people that write about certain things that take place later in the Book of Mormon. You got people that talk about things that took, you know, place previous, and lost records and all of those things. It would be hard to juggle all of those things. Do you know what I'm saying?
absolutely. And the definition of a classic, you hear people frivolously use the word classic. Oh, it's an instant classic. There's no such thing as an instant classic. The definition of a classic, whether it be a classic literature or whatever you want to say, a classic piece of music, is it has one thing qualifies it, and that is, has it stood the test of time? You know, it must withstand the test of time in order to become a classic. Well, the question is what keeps a piece of literature that's worthy of that title? And that it has to be able to withstand the test of time through a couple of devices, right? And there's
Right.
all kinds of people will have different definitions of how it comes to be, but I think it's pretty universally understood that the first thing is the book has got to have great ideas. It's got to be startling in some way. Otherwise, people aren't going to read it, and they're not going to recommend it, and they're not going to continue to go through it. So startling. So as I give these, think about the Book of Mormon in that standpoint. Startling ideas. Yeah, that a family would leave Jerusalem. Yeah, that's startling. That that Christ would appear in the Americas. That's startling. So there's many other things, and then there are plot twists and the rest of it that are startling. The next thing is it has to be universally applicable. You've got to be able to pick it up in 1835 and say, wow, that applies to me. And pick it up in 2022, 23 and say, wow, that applies to me. So there's universals throughout the whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
So that's another thing. The next thing is character development. If it's gonna be withstand the test of time, there has to be interesting, real people, and real people who are multidimensional. One of the books that, and some of the things that are literature withstand the test of time without that too much. I mean, Don Quixote is one of the most, I think it's the second most printed book in world history. I find it unreadable, but it has enough stories in it that you know, it kept people's interest. And he's not a particularly multidimensional character. But Captain Moroni,
Was that Man of La Mancha?
Man of La Mancha, well,
Yeah.
it's the story of Don Quixote. Man of La Mancha is the musical,
Right. Oh, okay.
which is actually better than the book.
See, a true scholar would know that was just the musical.
That's okay. You know, we're all scholars in our own.
That's right.
Fields in our own.
I always say
areas.
that I may not be able to articulate what I'm thinking, but that doesn't mean you're smarter than me.
No, it does not. It does not. But characters, you look at the Book of Mormon for characters, and you say, well, let's take three, okay, and analyze them as characters. Nephi. I'll come back to Captain Moroni in a second. Nephi. How does he change during two books? Well, he goes from an impetuous, rather arrogant fellow who completely bucks the patriarchal system. He was a revolutionary.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't listen to his older brothers. He says, you're wrong. We're going this way. And somebody who, I will go and do the things which the Lord has commanded, for I know, you know, boom, he's very dramatic and very self-assured. And then let me just go to Second Nephi chapter 4, right? When he says, "O wretched man that I am," this is verse 17. "Yea, my heart sorroweth because my flesh, my soul grieveth of mine iniquities. I am encompassed about because of the temptations and the sins which so easily beset me. And when I desire to rejoice, my heart groaneth because of my sins." Okay. I had just quoted before, I will go and do the things which the Lord hath commanded. And now in Second Nephi 4, it's a person who has grown and matured right before our eyes. In a fairly short number of pages, we get a very complex character. And here's a man who the Spirit says, slay Laban. And he says, well, I've never killed a man before. It's slay Laban. Okay, slays Laban. And at the time, it was kind of like, well, that was kind of awful, but I'll put on his armor and I'll continue on with my whole thing with the others. And that haunts him the rest of his life.
He mentions it later.
Yeah, I mean, it haunted him. The Lord told him to do it, but his conscience was so strong, it haunts him. In fact, it doesn't just haunt him, it haunts the Book of Mormon. It is the seminal event that causes, ultimately, after 400 years, 400 AD, the entire Nephite civilization to be destroyed.
Mm-hmm.
Why did the Lamanites hate the Nephites? It's because Nephi was in the words of Laman and Lemuel and their descendants, was a murderer. And so you've built your whole life upon a murder and a lie.
Yeah, what book is that where the king of the Lamanites was saying that they were disenfranchised?
Yeah,
but by their ancestor Nephi.
Yeah. And so that tension is throughout the entire book. And just that little, I mean, how's that for plotting? How would you, if you were to sit down and plot the Book of Mormon, you needed about a room or two full of whiteboards to be able to put all these things down and make the threads all come together. That's brilliant literature to be able to have done that as well. So that's Nephi, a memorable character. Anybody who's read the Book of Mormon, I could sit down and say, tell me about Nephi, and they can visualize him. They can feel his pain and feel his joy and all of the things that go in between it. Now let's take Captain Moroni. When I say the word Captain Moroni, what comes to your mind?
A general, courageous, the title of liberty.
Yeah.
The paintings of him in this like medieval armor or Renaissance looking armor.
It's too. I remember as a boy reading this. I mean, he was a superhero. You look at him and great. Now, if you have your greatest military leader and one of the greatest leaders in your book, you are not going to have him do what Mormon allowed to be done, and that is to expose a letter that he had written in his impetuousness and he was so sure of himself. He writes the letter, you know which letter I'm talking about,
Yes.
where
he's telling the Kingman. Are you talking about that one?
Yes.
Where he's like, hey guys, why aren't you sending me provisions? What's going on? You guys are wicked.
Yeah, and he just chastises them. Well, that was a foolish letter. You know, they say the best letter you've ever written is the one you didn't send when you're upset.
And they're like, wait a minute, you don't know what's going on here.
Yeah, and he makes Captain Moroni look ridiculous and impetuous. Yeah. Well, he made him into a real person.
Okay, so that's what I want to ask you real quick, but yeah. I want you to continue this.
Yeah, that's
because
okay.
This is juicy, man. So my question, this leads to a good question here. You're an experienced writer. You've read all kinds of literature. I mean, you go into where's it at? You talk about Shakespeare, Milton, Hardy, and James, and England, the England side, and then Hemingway, Steinbeck, Poe, and Twain, and many others, people that I've never heard of. So here's my question. When you see the Book of Mormon and you read it, as a writer, does it come across as a fiction, like a work of fiction, or biographical? Like, you can tell the difference when something is reality and fiction, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Is that a good question?
I think it's a wonderful question, because
Okay.
I'm just kind of thinking is, if I'm writing something that I wish to be either autobiographical or biographical, I slow down the language, and to be able to focus on what the truth is of the person as they're going into it. When I'm writing a story, I want to get the story moving. And so the story is going to take over with as well as the characters. The Book of Mormon, the Book of Mormon's interesting that way, because you get so immersed in the story and the doctrine. And I don't ever want to leave the doctrine. I'll come back to that. The doctrine is so deep and profound. There's not another book in the world that speaks of Christ more than the Book of Mormon. It speaks of Christ and the words of Christ more than the Bible does, by far. It's not even close. So, yeah, there's, have you heard the talk by Elder Hugh B. Brown, Profile of a Prophet?
I believe so. I've read a lot of stuff by Hugh B. Brown.
Well,
I think I have read that.
this is a talk he gave at BYU, at a devotional at BYU, in which he talked about when he was just before World War II. He was in England, and the chief judge of the Supreme Court of England was a friend of his, who wanted him to come in and say, "You're a bright man, you're a smart man. I just don't understand how you can fall for this Mormon religion."
Yeah. Okay. That sounds familiar.
To talk about Joseph Smith, that's just fantastic. It's unbelievable. And what I'd like you to do is, I'd like you to prepare over the next month or so a series of briefs to show me why you would think that is true. And Elder Brown says, "Well, okay, but let's do it right now." And so he talks about the conversation. I recommend this talk. You can go onto Google, Hugh B. Brown, Profile of a Prophet, and you can get the actual recording of him talking, because it's a brilliant speech, and it's totally engrossing.
Is that in the BYU recordings where they have the
Yes.
MP3s?
Yeah. But one of the things he says to the judge, he says, he wrote the Book of Mormon. Actually, as he says it, he brought forth the Book of Mormon. And let me just give you a couple things he points out, that if you want to write a Book of Mormon, you're going to have to include the following things. And he's the one that challenged, he says, "I want all of you students out there to go out and write one chapter of a Book of Mormon, your own Book of Mormon. Just create it yourself. In fact, I challenge you to write one verse. Good luck." But he says, this is the epic nature of the Book of Mormon. Again, this goes into the classic mode of literature. He has 54 chapters dealing with war, 21 chapters of historical significance, where he's talking about history, 55 chapters on visions and prophecies, 71 chapters on doctrine and exhortation, 21 chapters on the ministry of Christ. And when you have that complexity, again, this is answering your question about, is it history or biographical,
Or does it look biographical?
or is it fiction? Well, some of it might be able to take on the area of fiction with the stories. For example, all the stories of Alma the Younger Well, and King Noah and Alma the elder and Alma the younger and the sons of Mosiah, all those incredible stories there, and the stories of Alma and Amulek. By the way, is there any more heart-wrenching story in the world of Alma and Amulek being forced to watch women and children of believers thrown into the fire? And for them to say, Amulek to say, let us stretch forth our hand and save these people, and Alma hesitating and then saying, we can't. It is what must take place. That's a gut-wrenching story.
Well, and it's I always kind of find it comical or funny that when a critic of the church or critics of the Book of Mormon point out that well that was copied from the Bible, or that sounds too much like Noah, or that sounds too much like Moses' story, or well, it's the gospel of Jesus Christ. They were prophets. We're going to experience people in the Book of Mormon are going to experience very similar things to what other prophets have experienced.
Well,
Miracles are going to be performed pretty similarly. There's going to be we're speaking about the same gospel of Jesus Christ.
You remember what I said at the beginning? One of the themes of a classic is that it's universal. It's something that we can all understand. So there are only 7 plot lines available in literature.
Right.
Don't ask me what they are. I just remember there's 7. You repeat it, but the human story repeats itself incessantly because we are human beings. And more importantly, we're all children of our Father in heaven. So the light of Christ is out there, and it is going to stimulate people throughout universally. So let me go back to another character in the Book of Mormon, if I may.
Mm-hmm.
A fascinating fellow, Nephi, son of Helaman. He's kind of in some ways, he's kind of funny. He purposely prays in the open to get people to react, to be noticed. He does some other interesting things, but he perhaps might be listed as one of the greatest prophets ever. And I don't know of another prophet or even a mythological character who was given a greater blessing and power than Nephi, the son of Helaman. Do you remember what that was? That power? The Lord said, because of your faith and because I know you will never abuse the power I'm giving you, I give you the power that if you want that mountain to be removed,
yes, I remember that.
If you want, if you want it to rain, it will rain. Whatever you say will happen. No, I don't know of anybody that's ever received that kind of a blessing. So, he has this amazing thing. So here we have one of the greatest prophets ever to live. And again, the writer allows him to become human, in which he's bemoaning the terrible sins and perversions of the Nephites. And he says, oh, that we could live in the days of Father Lehi, when everything was so nice and wonderful and people obeyed the commandments. Oh, it would have been nice. And the reader's going, I just read that a couple hours ago, and that was anything but peaceful. So, there he is, the prophet, very human, looking for the good old days. That's brilliant plotting. That's brilliant character analysis to be able to do that. And that Mormon would leave that in tells you something about Mormon, the writer of it, that he understood what this was going to be used for, and he made his characters real. because they were real. He allowed them to be real. So,
Right.
so
Well,
that
weren't there also mistakes? Where in the Book of Mormon am I thinking of where there's proof that one of the prophets would correct himself as he was writing? Do you know what I'm talking about?
yeah, yeah, it's Mormon allows all these things to go on. He's an amazing abridger, because his whole focus, he only has really one. Well, he has well, it's still one focus. His focus is to show that when you do not accept the gospel of Jesus Christ, you're headed for destruction. That's the whole book, and all of these things point to that.
It's the first principles and ordinances of the gospel, right? Faith,
So,
repentance, baptism, and the Holy Ghost.
but if you don't, in Alma 5, he said, have you experienced a mighty change of heart? That's the other part that goes with that, is until you have a mighty change of heart, you will not be able to accept Christ as your Savior. And if you do not do that, you and your civilization are doomed to be the Nephite civilization.
Yeah, most definitely.
Which brings me to another point. I hope cut me off whenever you want. It's okay.
No. I want to know if we're did you have am I going to be able to see if I got any of those words right, or was that not part of our we don't need to do that.
No, it's a matter of how familiar you are with these words, and to recognize that you're a smart guy, and yet you struggled with a number of these words, and yet this uneducated Joseph Smith managed to use them precisely correctly in the book.
I see what you're saying. Okay, right. Yeah,
It's part of the miracle of
with
the
a
whole.
fourth grade education.
Yeah, and that's why I go around when I go to universities. I don't talk about church, I don't talk about doctrine. I just want to know how much they're familiar with this. And people are not familiar with these words. This is of a lexicon that's perhaps different than what we're used to entirely. Um, and the fact that Joseph Smith had, like I said before, I'm sure Joseph Smith stopped and said, consignation? What's that mean? Yeah.
Well, didn't Emma say that he said, is there a wall around Jerusalem?
Yes.
I think he asked Emma that. Daniel C. Peterson mentions that
Yeah.
at one time, that
Absolutely.
that Emma said, yeah, he couldn't draft a good letter that he was writing to people. I'm kind of paraphrasing, but something like that. And then he was curious. He didn't know, I guess she was scribing, or he was looking at it, and he's like, Emma, I didn't know there was a wall around Jerusalem.
Yeah, absolutely.
He's learning that. He's learning things as he's translating the Book of Mormon.
Yeah. Sometime you'll have to get Royal Skousen and ask him about Coriantumr. And as they were translating that.
I would love to have him. You know him too?
Royal, like I said, we were in the High Council together.
Well, ask him. Yeah, we'll talk about that another time.
Yeah, ask him. He says, how do you spell that? And Joseph said it exactly, how to spell it. And Oliver looked, because Oliver had written several different ways of writing it out, and none of them were correct. And as soon as Joseph told him, it was correct, which goes back to Joseph Smith didn't write the Book of Mormon. He didn't translate the Book of Mormon. He simply dictated it as he was told. I know Dan Peterson was telling me he and a bunch of them were talking about the language and the intellectual and everything else. And they are sure that a whole bunch of the reformers, like Calvin and so many of the reformers we know in England and Switzerland and Germany, they were up in heaven in the 1830s as a council, and they were giving Joseph Smith the words. They were telling him what to say because it sounds like them.
Well, who's the other Skousen? We forgot his name. You mentioned him earlier.
Royal.
Royal, right? Okay, Royal Skousen.
Yeah. But if I could go, you'll go ahead.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
I wanted to give one last literary reference to the Book of Mormon. If you're going to write a Book of Mormon, you've got to be conversant with metaphors, similes, narrations, exposition, descriptive oratory, epic, lyric, and parables, and as I said, allegories. The Book of Mormon has all of these things. And if I could focus just on allegory for a second, of course, I had the misfortune, I guess some people would say, of having so much literature in high school and the rest of it, that we were forced to read allegories. And have you acquainted with any allegories outside of the Book of Mormon?
The Bible. Let's see. Well, I mean, yes, but I have to think of them. What, like where we're talking about the Princess and the Pea, or no, that's not really an allegory.
Well, it has a nature of allegory.
Okay, so
John Bunyan's Pilgrim's Progress, for example, is considered the great allegory.
So an allegory can be a big piece or a small piece, right?
Yeah,
an allegory can be a novel, right?
Absolutely.
It can be allegorical, right?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe is an allegory.
Oh, definitely. Now, did C.S. Lewis mean that as he was writing, or wasn't he a convert to Christianity later?
Well, no, he was a convert to Christianity earlier.
Oh, earlier. Okay, and then he wrote Narnia.
His purpose of writing Chronicles of Narnia was to teach children about Christ. Well, I think is it the third volume in Chronicles of Narnia. He takes the children to the beach and said, "I'm leaving you now." And they said, "Don't leave us." He says, "I'm leaving you, but I brought you here so that when you go back, you will recognize me by another name." That's Aslan talking to the children. And the name you'll be known as is Christ. So, it's a wonderful allegory.
Yeah.
Allegory.
Do you have, are you short for time? Do you need to go like right away?
I'm okay.
Do you have like 5 more minutes? Is that cool?
Sure.
Okay. I was curious, going back to your article. Well, let me answer this about the allegories. I'm not familiar with a lot of them. I am, but I have to refresh my memory and go, oh yeah. But it is amazing how you mentioned 2 allegories in the Book of Mormon, the allegory of the olive orchard.
Vineyard.
Okay. And then because I always say the olive trees or olive branch, but it's the olive orchard.
That's good.
And then there's the allegory, the tree of life, right? Those are the 2 main. There's not any other allegories, is there, in the Book of Mormon?
The Book of Mormon is an allegory.
Okay, right.
The whole thing. Ether, the Book of Ether, is the story about birth, coming out of a land, being baptized under the water, coming on to a new world. The whole thing is an allegory of your life. Your life, if you do not accept Christ and understand the mission of the atonement.
Okay. Well, I do find it fascinating. To answer your question, I don't know a lot of allegories, but I do know some the ones that taught that Christ taught
Yeah,
were
parables.
had so many meanings, so
Yeah.
many hidden gems, so many it was multifaceted in value and meaning and teaching and wisdom and all of that. I mean, you could like the just like the parable of the prodigal son.
Yes.
You can take the parable on a face level, a very surface level, very simple. Okay, this means the you know what am I talking about? I'm talking about the lesson behind it. But there's so many other lessons in there. So the Book of Mormon has that too.
Yeah. That,
Joseph Smith, like go ahead.
that's why I say it's brilliant literature. You cannot take a book that has the parable of the tree of life and the parable of the olive orchard and dismiss it out of hand, because those two allegories are perhaps the best allegories ever written. Hang on, my phone just accidentally rang. I didn't mean to do that.
Okay.
You can edit that out or leave it in.
No, I didn't even hear it.
But those two allegories alone, if you just read those, you'd say, wow, this is taken from a great piece of writing, because there is no more complex allegory than the olive orchard. I mean, if you're going to read that, you really can't read it without a pen and pencil. I mean, a pen and paper to jot down all these possible things, and then to try to tie them all together. That takes a special mind to have written that, and it was Zenos that wrote that.
Well, and it's basically explaining the house of Israel
Yes,
and the Gentiles and how the Lord preserves his people and continues to reestablish
yeah.
new dispensations and continue uh, having the gospel on the earth, right?
Yes, and go back sometime and read the olive orchard and apply it only to you. Forget about the house of Israel. Look at the times when you were straying and how he grafted you into something else. And then, this habit, we're going to throw down there. We're going to cumber the ground with your bad habit. You can go through and personalize the olive orchard, which is a fascinating exercise to do.
Yeah.
And you can see in the final thing is the Lord keeps coming back to you time and time and time and time again. Even though,
you mean working with us on an individual level and working with us collectively as well.
absolutely. Again, the brilliant universalities of the Book of Mormon are everywhere in this book. Can I?
Yes, you can.
I want to give, since we're about out of time, I don't want to lose
Well, I wanted to ask. Okay, you go.
No, you
yeah,
go with your stuff. You're the host. You do
well,
it.
no, I want you to get to that right now. But after that, I just wanted you to explain why you mentioned in your article about civilizations lasting about 200 years, and you talked about, well, what was his name? Alexander Tyler,
Tyler.
the Scottish economist in the 19th century, predicted that democracies cannot last. Why was it important for you to talk about that? And I think I know why, because it relates to also how these civilizations lasted in the Book of Mormon, right?
Yeah.
But if you want to answer what you were going to talk about
I'm going to
first.
answer that first. Is
okay, sure.
I
just find that fascinating.
When you look at the civilization pattern in the Book of Mormon, it follows exactly what Alexander Fraser Tytler wrote about civilizations like a democracy. And that is the rise and fall. We begin in poverty and we're humble and we listen. And by doing that, we learn lessons and we begin to become enriched of our souls. And then we begin the business part of it and trust and all those things that come about. And we're humble and we learn and we become wealthy and we become convinced of our brilliance and how smart we are. We're no longer humble and we take it upon ourselves, and pretty soon we are destroyed and we're once again enslaved. So yeah, it's very much similar.
Okay, so not to get sidetracked or spin off in another direction, but do you think that that's a true statement, that democracies don't last forever? But if that's the case, Joseph Smith said and I might be going on a different subject and we're not going to expound on that, but Joseph Smith always taught that the Constitution was inspired. The Brethren have always taught that. Is it practical to think that the Constitution will last forever, or is it supposed to last forever? And if not, why do we put so much emphasis on it in the church as being something inspired, which I believe it is? I don't know. How do you feel about that?
Well, people have their free agency, and the Constitution is there as just exactly what Joseph Smith talked about. It's divinely inspired, but you notice how we chip at it. We've got people who will do anything when it comes to the Second Amendment to deny that it's there. They would love to say, well, it doesn't exist. Well, it does exist. It's there. And we have become a society with its more and more loving ourselves, loving our intellect. And, where evil is good and good is evil. We are headed towards a Nephite ending if we don't change. Now,
I think that's kind of what I was leading up to.
I want to go back and say I think we're far from it, because there are so many good people and wonderful people in this country who are God-fearing, who are loving of the Savior, who even though they may not be of a Christian belief, they believe in God and morals. And the nation is still bolstered by that. We have to fight against apathy, but it's there. So.
Yeah.
Let me read just a closing statement from the Book of Mormon. And when you talk about, is it literature, I want to read this and put this into your literature bank, okay?
Okay.
This is Jacob, chapter 7. The time passed away with us, and also our lives passed away, like as it were unto us a dream, we being a lonesome and a solemn people, wanderers cast out from Jerusalem, born in tribulation, in a wilderness and hated of our brethren, which caused wars and contentions, wherefore we did mourn out our days. That's poetry.
Yes, very much indeed.
So yeah, I submit to you, the Book of Mormon is great literature. It passes all of the standards, all of the tests. And more than that, it's spiritual, great literature. My pleasure.
I want to mention Mark and his wife take people on tours to Croatia, and the link will be in the descriptions field. If you guys are interested, you got to take them up on this offer, because they got really good ice cream there. It's not called ice cream. Gelato. And as far as brother Mark and his wife are concerned, Croatia is one of the best kept secrets in the world, right?
Oh, absolutely. It's fabulous. Go to our website and you'll see all kinds of great pictures. And there's 3 videos that were done with drones and other kinds of things that show what we do in the land, and you'll just enjoy the videos. So.
All right.